So thank you, Midhat. Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Bagger, CEO of the American Physical Society, and I would like to welcome you to today's Delta Phi webinar. I would also like to thank you for joining us for what I expect will be an important and enlightening conversation. The focus of today's webinar will be immigration and scientists, a topic that is both timely and critical to the future of the United States. In particular, the webinar will focus on the experiences of immigrant scientists. Speakers will discuss the contributions that immigrant scientists have made to science, as well as the challenges they have faced in the immigration process and in practicing science within the United States. This is our second Delta Phi webinar examining the experiences of Chinese and Chinese American physicists. The previous webinar centered on research security. The majority of respondents to the post-webinar survey indicated that they plan to take actions on the issues raised during that webinar. We are hopeful that today's webinar will also be a catalyst, not only for conversations, but also for action. We at the American Physical Society care deeply about issues that affect our members, and it is our goal to effect positive change. Today, we are hosting this webinar in cooperation with our partners at the American Institute of Physics, the American Association of Physics Teachers, the Asian American Scholars Forum, the Asian Pacific American Justice, and the International Organization of Chinese Physicists and Astronomers, and the National Society of Black Physicists. So I send a special thank you to those organizations for joining with us today. In our numbers is our strength. I know that these conversations can be difficult and emotional, so I ask everyone to be mindful of the APS Code of Conduct for meetings, and that the discussion be conducted with the dignity and the respect it deserves. And now, I will turn the mic over to APS President, Professor Jim Gates. Jim is the Ford Foundation Professor of Physics at Brown University, Director of the Brown Theoretical Physics Center, a recipient of the National Medal of Science, and a member of President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and welcome to all of our audience members. This issue, as John said, is one that we have kept a close eye upon from its inception. As you probably know, those of you familiar with this webinar series, Delta Phi is an effort for the American Physical Society to engage in an intentional and deliberative process when it comes to debating our culture, as well as assessing the need for culture change. Our first four webinars concentrated on the experience of African Americans, who are obviously a minority in our discipline. However, the conception of this webinar series that I have is that it is created for the society to deal with all of its issues of culture, whether they be around diversity, equity, inclusion, whether it be around gender discrimination, whether it be around professionalism, ethics, transparency. There's a whole list of things where culture is important. It has often been said that for an individual, character is destiny. Well, I believe, based on watching the behavior and accomplishments of organizations, that for organizations, culture is destiny. And so we've implemented this hopefully as a long-term way for the APS to deal with issues of its culture, no matter what axis this debate falls along. I want to welcome today's panelists. We have a distinguished panel, Dr. Stephen Chu of Stanford University, Dr. Chrissy Du from Harvard University, Dr. Mark Alcesser, the Director of Government Affairs at the APS, Dr. Jiang Kim, Chairman of Keysway Mobile Inc., and Dr. Mei-Kung Liu of Stony Brook. I have met some of you before, and I'm very happy to have the chance to meet the rest of this panel. And so at this point, let's sit back, those of us who are in the audience, listen to our colleagues and learn from their experience, reflect upon those experiences and ask ourselves, each one of you, can I make a difference? Because that's really what Delta Phi is about. I want each person to ask, can I make a difference? It's not just about a debate, it's about taking action. And with that comment, I would like to turn the microphone over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Andrea Liu, who has been a partner to me the entire time I have been on the executive line of the APS. Dr. Liu is at the University of Pennsylvania, the Hepburn Professor of Physics, and the past speaker of the APS Council. And it is in that last regard that she and I have forged a bond around the issues that threaten the sustainability and viability of the society. And we're working to make sure that the society has a bright and long future. So Andrea, please take over.
Thank you so much. Let's see, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Let me make that bigger. Yeah, so let me just start out with a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any questions at any point, please go ahead and enter them into the Q&A box, which you'll see down at the bottom. We're going to reserve questions for the second half of this webinar. But please also feel free to share your thoughts and reactions and stories on the chat as we go. All right, let me start out by thanking Geraldine, first of all, for just incredible guidance through the whole process of planning this webinar. And Midhat for organizing everything. And the committee that helped to plan this whole series of webinars actually on Asian American issues, Steve Chu, David Gross, Tao Han, Xiaoliang, Xiaoxing, and Sinke all helped out there. And I'd also like to thank something that came out of the last webinar. There was a suggestion in the Q&A that it would be useful to give guidance on how to convince universities and other research institutions to support their researchers if they were under investigation. And a bunch of volunteers stepped up to do that. And if you want to see a link to it, you can get to it from this website here at the Asian American Scholar Forum. So I want to thank all the people who were involved in preparing that toolkit as well. Okay, so I'd like to briefly follow up on Jim's remarks by saying that the last several years have really been a very difficult time for international students and researchers in the US, especially those from China. Things are improving now. You'll hear that from Mark Elsesser later. But in the meantime, there's been really quite a disturbing cultural change in the US. So a Pew poll from last April found that 53% of Americans now support limiting Chinese students studying in the US. And a Gallup poll from last March shows that the percentage of Americans who perceive China as the greatest enemy of the US has more than doubled in 1 year to 45%, with Russia now as a distant second at 26%. Hate incidents against Asian Americans have jumped 150% from 2020 to 2021. And the US government is putting new restrictions on research contacts with China based on concern that China is stealing intellectual property from academic labs. Finally, there's the China Initiative, which was launched by the Department of Justice in 2018 to pursue cases of research and economic espionage involving China. And just to quote Jim, John, and other members of the Board Executive Committee of the APS in a recent editorial, there are real threats to national security posed by unauthorized transfer of knowledge and technical expertise, but a response that chokes off legitimate scientific contacts only compounds the problems that it seeks to resolve. This will inevitably lead to the loss of US competitiveness and international prestige and threaten our future economic progress. To this, I would add that the response has also had a devastating human toll, creating a culture of fear, especially among Chinese scientists of Chinese origin. So just last week, we had the great news that the first Grant Fraud China Initiative case to go to trial against Anming Hu of the University of Tennessee ended with acquittal on all counts. But as pointed out by John Yang, president of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Dr. Hu has lost years of his life, his job, his immigration status, his ability to obtain future federal grants, and possibly his career. His college student son fears that he can no longer pursue his dream to study computer science in the US and was forced to abandon his studies at the University of Tennessee. Dr. Hu has 2 minor children, one of whom is constantly haunted by nightmares that affected his studies, causing him to drop classes and give up his dream of entering the STEM field. This is the direct toll on scientists who are investigated and their families. But I hope that the talks and personal stories that will follow will also give you a clearer picture of the indirect human toll of these policies. So I'd like to thank all of you for attending this webinar, because taking the time to get informed and to engage with this issue is one of the best things you can do to support international students and researchers. They are not just a faceless category of people, they are real people. And I hope that hearing their stories in this webinar will spur you to take more action, whether you're Chinese or not, but want to support international colleagues. Now, let me just say one more thing, which is that I'd like to encourage those of you who are international physicists to attend the APS webinar series through the careers. The next one is coming up soon. Let me stop sharing my slides. Steve, would you like to start sharing yours? Okay.
All right.
And let me introduce Professor Steve Chu from Stanford. Many things, including, I'm just going to say a few, the past president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, US Secretary of Energy under Obama, and Nobel laureate in physics for laser cooling and atom trapping. And Steve, I'll give you a 5-minute warning at the end.
Okay, Andrea, thank you. And thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to talk about immigration in US science. And so the questions I want to address are first, to remind people that immigrants have added immensely to our scientific and technological excellence. But that excellence is being challenged. But in addition to that, there are deep concerns about Chinese theft of intellectual property. How should we best respond to that? So let me start with the first one and remind all of you that for a very long time, the US was recipient of political events that drove a lot of students and scientists in Europe and Asia to the US, Nazi Germany, Italy during Mussolini's time, China during several events, and finally the Soviet Union. And let's see, how are you? Yes. And during those times, many graduate students and postdocs came to the United States to study. They stayed because we were a free and open society. And most of these students became US citizens and raised their families. They've added immensely to our technological and scientific excellence. For example, of the 143 immigrants in the United States that won Nobel Prizes, they're listed as US laureates because they were there when they got their prize. And if we count second generation immigrants, such as myself, the fraction might be the majority. And indeed, all 7 physics Nobel laureates born in China earned their PhDs in the US and became US citizens. Immigrants also played an incredible role in our national defense. This is a picture of a reunion of the University of Chicago scientists and the 4th anniversary of the first controlled nuclear fusion in the University of Chicago. And I list a few names of the immigrant scientists. In terms of my own personal life, this is a picture of my father and mother on their wedding day with my father's oldest sister, who was a professor of chemistry at Tsinghua University. you would be, it's surprising that such handsome parents could have produced a child like that, but then never mind. This is a picture of my grandfather, Xu Tenli, on my mother's side on the left, and his brother, his older brother, on the right. Just by way of setting the scene of what life was like when the communists took over in 1949, all people with education really had to flee. My father's oldest sister was actually named as the most significant women chemist in pre-war China, a full professor at Tsinghua at the time. But since she was a woman and Chinese, she could only get a job teaching at a small college that trained women to be high school teachers. My father got his PhD. My mother and father went to MIT graduate school, and he got his PhD and eventually became a professor of book and poly. My grandfather actually was president of Peiyang University starting at the age of 32. But in 1950, he appears on the shores of the United States, jobless. He's not going to be hired as a university professor. So he actually taught himself civil engineering again. That was his specialty, and went on to receive the highest award from the American Concrete Institute in 1985. And finally, I did not know this while I was growing up, but my grand uncle actually worked with Perrin during the Brownian Motion days. And the year Perrin got a Nobel Prize, the French government actually gave him a medal in appreciation for the work he did. So it was a rough life when they all came to the US in 1949, 1950, and there was at the time considerable prejudice against the Chinese. Let me go on and remind you that there were many Americans who have actually founded many top companies, 44 of the top 100 Fortune 500 companies, and I just listed in red some of the people. You will recognize their names. There are actually many, many more. And also should remind you that the CEOs of the two companies that developed the messenger RNA COVID vaccine, Pfizer and Moderna, were both immigrants. All right, so how should we respond to the Chinese theft of intellectual property? And let's see how we've been responding to it so far. In 2018, there's the China Initiative began when Jeff Sessions was Attorney General, and he decided that they wanted to focus on the theft of intellectual property, especially researchers at US academic institutions, which especially were not disclosing their ties to China and inclusion in talent programs and things like that, or perhaps even current or former members of the People's Liberation Army. And so, let me just see here. In 2020, the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, said, "We've now reached a point where the FBI is opening a new China-related counterintelligence case about every 10 hours. Of the nearly 5,000 active FBI cases, almost half are related to China." And so of those thousands of cases, so far, about 100 people have been formally charged. There have been 4 convictions or guilty pleas. I think 2 of them were guilty pleas. As Andrea mentioned, a case against Aming Hu was, the first trial was a mistrial, and then he was acquitted by Justice Thomas Varlan, the US District Court judge. And it's important to point out that when the judge acquits someone before the second trial, they have to assume that all the evidence that the prosecution is going to present will be taken at face value. And even if you assume that, could any rational juror find the defendants guilty or the defendant guilty of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt? And so I'm not going to go into this, but in the trial, it was also pointed out by the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, in an assurance letter to Jet Propulsion Laboratory and to NASA, it was a subcontract of a NASA grant. This letter of assurance is predicated on the understanding that the NASA class deviation, which is restrictions against research with NASA money, does not apply to participation of students, faculty, and staff from non-Chinese entities engaged in fundamental research with a meaning consistent with National Security Decision Directive 189. What is NSDD 189? It is a directive that defines fundamental research. And in it, it says fundamental research means basic and applied research in science and engineering, the results of which ordinarily are published and shared broadly within the scientific community, as distinguished from proprietary research and from industrial development, which are ordinarily restricted for national security reasons or proprietary reasons. It is the policy of the Reagan administration that to the maximum extent possible, the products of fundamental research remain unrestricted. And he goes on to say, no restrictions may be placed upon the conduct or reporting of federally funded fundamental research that has not received national security classification. All right, so there's more histories of this. I'm not sure I have the time, but just this is perhaps important that when Gang Chen was arrested for grant fraud on January 14th, 2021, the federal prosecutor in Boston said the allegations of the complaint implied that this was not just about greed, but about loyalty to China. And Professor Chen had been a naturalized US citizen since June of 2000, 21 years before that. Well, 5 days later, Joe Biden becomes president of the United States. And then on June 22nd of 2001, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, says, we want to be careful to separate out a country that is a serious competitor with us, aggressive competitor, with Americans and also with the residents who come from that country. We're going to be careful that we do not forget the distinction between those two. All right, so I can go on and list a number of other things of people who've been arrested and then fired the same day they were arrested for failing to disclose. Now, the Justice Department dropped that case. They dropped several other cases in that month in July of 2021. So the disturbing thing is in some cases, significant number of cases, as soon as someone is arrested, before they're charged, they're fired, and later they're not charged. Anyway, I should also mention the Department of Justice cases appear to be in conflict with this National Security Directive, established in 1985, reaffirmed in 2001 and 2010. Now, I'm not going to argue we have to safeguard the attempts against China and other countries to gain early and inappropriate access to what US researchers are doing. But I believe it still remains in our best interest to reaffirm the principles of that presidential directive and continue to openly publish the results of federally sponsored research. Well, why? First of all, creativity in science and technology thrives in an open society with a free flow of information. And as scientists, we not only stand on the shoulders of giants, we still stand on the shoulders of the entire international scientific enterprise. We've led the world in many areas in science, technology, innovation, but by erecting walls with China, we'll reverse the brain gain that was responsible for our preeminence since the 1930s. I lost a postdoc who accepted my offer, but then went to University of Singapore because of the belligerence of the previous administration and another postdoc who left my lab early because of the hostile environment against the Chinese. And so I also point out that the rest of the world is going to benefit from continuing to work scientifically with China and use, for example, their world-class international facilities, user facilities such as the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope that is the bigger and better version of our SIBO, and the Shanghai Technology Institute of Technology's X-ray free electron laser. They just reported the first single-shot femtosecond coherent diffraction picture in the water window. Remarkable user facilities. So what have we been doing? Well, this is from a Nature article of 2020 showing the R&D research in the United States, China, the EU, and other countries. By 2017, China has been catching up, and by now they have passed us in research. And this investment in research in the US versus China shows, and this is taken from Rising Above the Gathering Storm Revisit 2010. In 2009, we said in this report that 51% of patents were awarded to non-US companies. China has gone from 15th place to 5th place in international patents. The World Economic Forum ranks the US as 48th in the quality of mathematics and science education. China's Tsinghua and Peking universities are the two largest suppliers of students who receive PhDs in the United States. And in an update to this report in 2010, by 2019, China passed the US in worldwide patents granted and has had at that year 2019, 1,400,000 patent applications versus 600,000 patent applications from the US. So what is the best way to respond to technology itself in an increasingly competitive world with this?
5 minutes.
5-minute warning?
Yep.
Right, and to that I turn to something that occurred in 1957. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union placed a 4-pound satellite in orbit called Sputnik, and this is a picture of the New York Times headlines. And you could actually see Sputnik from Earth with your eyes as it flew by, or at least binoculars. And so a month later, President Eisenhower goes and makes a major speech in response to Sputnik. The country was very, very concerned, but he did not call for more military spending in this speech. And I'll take some excerpts from the speech. He said, according to my scientific friends, one of our greatest and most glaring deficiencies is the failure of us in this country to give high enough priority to scientific education and to the place of science in our national life. Education requires time, incentive, and skilled teachers. They believe a second critical need is that of giving higher priority, both public and private, to basic research. Here's more of his speech. Although tonight's purposes, I stress the influence of science on defense, the peaceful contributions of science to healing, to enriching life, to freeing the spirit. These are the most important products of the conquest of nature's secrets. So I closed by saying in 1957, I was 9 years old, son of immigrants, and I benefited from the Sputnik era, post-Sputnik era investment in science education in the United States as we trained a new corps of US scientists. These are some of the ways we should be responding to the technological threats. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that powerful talk. Thank you. John, would you like to go ahead and start sharing your slides while I introduce you? And go ahead and unmute and turn on your camera as well. Our next speaker is John Kim. So he's chairman of Kisway Mobile and former president of Bell Labs. You'll hear his very inspiring personal story. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and I guess like Steve's uncle, was recognized by the French Legion of Honor, in John's case for his services in global technology. So John, I'll also give you a 5-minute warning, verbal warning. Thank you. Go ahead. Oh, don't forget to unmute.
Thank you, Andrea. Let me figure out how to start the presentation mode. There you go. In 2013, I received a call from the president-elect of South Korea. She wants me to join her cabinet as the Minister of Science, ICT, and Future Planning. Since I was and am a US citizen, this nomination was highly unusual. As one would expect, I did some deep soul searching and seek the advice of family and close friends, including some senior US officials. They all encouraged me to take the job and said, South Korea is not an ally, and what's good for Korea is also good for the United States and good for the world. So, although I have never been involved in politics, I resigned from my job as the president of Bell Labs and went to Korea with a sense of mission that this was a calling from the above. Although I expected some controversy with my nomination, I wasn't prepared to deal with the reality of the politics. I was harshly treated by the opposition party and its supporters. I was called a black-haired American, and some speculated that I could be a US spy. I was served in the past as a member of the board of external advisor for the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. I was asked about my loyalty, such as which side will I be on if the war breaks out between Korea and the United States. Of course, this kind of question is like asking which side will you be on if your mother and your father fight. It is in our human nature to love both mother and father. I feel the same way about Korea and the United States. I was born in Korea, but I grew up in America. So I consider Korea as my mother country and America as my father country. Although Korea didn't and doesn't allow dual citizenships, this situation applies to many of my colleagues who have dual citizenship, such as US and Canada, US and Belgium, US and France, US and Israel, and so on. When the political attack expanded into my family, it was just too much for me to take. So I withdrew my nomination, returned to US. After clearing my head by spending some time in African safari, I co-founded a tech startup called Kisway Mobile and served as the executive chairman. So today, I would like to share my personal perspective from immigrant who pursued the American dream. I was born in 1960, year of the rat. The picture on the screen describes my main character trait as a risk taker, but a prudent one. I immigrated to the United States from Korea in 1975. Few things that made significant impression on me at the time was color TV. I have never seen color TV before. Big cars everywhere, and rich content in music and entertainment. Initially, I was wowed because everything looked so charming and prosperous in the United States. However, my personal life wasn't so charming. I came from a broken family. My parents were divorced when I was little. We lived in a government subsidized housing, and I got my clothes from the thrift stores. And I was constantly working to meet the ends meet. I was delivering newspapers in the morning, working as a waiter in the afternoon, and then mowed the lawn in the weekend. When I was 16, I had a major argument with my father and my stepmother, and got kicked out of the house. So I moved in with my high school math teacher in his basement room, and I worked full-time at the 7-Eleven convenience stores. Every day, I worked 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., midnight shift, and then went to school in the morning. Fortunately, my math teacher, Mr. Dan Breeden, also studied a new course in computer programming, teaching basics. I took that course and I got hooked. So when I graduated from high school, I didn't have money to go to college, but with help of a guidance counselor and some of the teachers, I was able to apply to universities and got a scholarship to attend Johns Hopkins University. I continued to work full time while I was in college. I got a job at the local startup called Digitus as a design engineer, and eventually became a part owner and partner. But when I graduated from college, I decided that it's time for me to repay the, what I owe to this country, the United States. And I decided to do that by joining the Navy. And I was so appreciative of the opportunity that I had in the United States. And I thought, this was my way of saying thank you. I served 7 years in the nuclear submarine service from 1982 to 1989, and then stayed as a reserve officer for 6 more years. During the time when I was serving as a reserve officer, war broke out. As a reserve officer, I was assigned to Pentagon as a briefer for the Chief of Naval Operations when the first war with Iraq broke out. Iraq invaded Kuwait. Coalition forces led by US decided to push Iraq out of Kuwait. Iraq was fighting back by launching Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia. Mobile Scud missiles were particularly problematic. When our attack airplanes arrived at the mobile Scud missile launcher, it has moved to a different location. We were able to follow the movement from our low Earth orbit satellites, but we did not have a capability to send new target location to the moving attack airplane in real time. Well, I decided to solve this problem on my own. Goal was to take the satellite image, move the information through the network around the world, and display it on the multifunction display in the cockpit of the A-6 attack airplane near real time. Once I solved this problem, I productized it and then commercialized it. The company that I founded based on this technology really took off. And in February 1997, company went public. In that year, in May of 1997, our company was selected as the hottest growth company among all public companies in the United States. And that puts me on the cover of the Business Week magazine. And in 1998, I sold the company to Lucent Technology for $1.1 billion in cash. I stayed on with the Lucent Technology. First, I was appointed as a president of a carrier networks division, and then later president of the Optical Networking Group. Optical Networking Group, or ONG, was facing a major challenge. We were getting beaten by Nortel Networks and upstart Ciena. Internally, everyone was blaming others for the downfall of the optical networking business. And I felt that I was putting there to become an scapegoat, but I was determined to succeed. I knew that I had to stop the blaming game and come together as a team if we were to tackle on the challenges ahead. So what I did was I brought the entire leadership team throughout the world, the group of maybe 30 some people from Europe, China, everywhere. And it had an upside. Although the picture shows a very strong current that but it was a level 1, most calm water that we had whitewater rafting. And I put the people in the same boat, the people who didn't like each other, people who were blaming each other. And there were a group of several boats, 8 boats or something like that. And what people did was stay silent. They didn't want to talk to each other, but they would talk to their friends or on the other boat. So they would talk across their colleagues on other boat. After a while, they got bored, so they splashed a little bit of water, and then they splashed back, and soon there was a war broke out. I was splashing water to each other with a paddle. And now people who didn't talk to each other on the same boat, on the same side, against another group of people that didn't like each other on the other boat. Then for a couple hours, I think it was like a 4-hour float down, so it was a long time. They became close. So in the dinner time, after this, session, I did not assign people to a table. I let people sit where they wanted to. It was interesting enough, people on the same boat, they sat together and they talked to each other, talked about family, talked about, things other than work. It turns out, they have a lot of things in common. Next day, we had the best meeting ever. And that was the beginning of a turnaround. A year later, we went from number 4 market share leader in our business to number 1 market share leader in the world by their oral report. We increased the revenue by 4x or something like that. And really taught us a very, very interesting lesson. That is, innovation is a team sport. And we need everybody. And it's the same people. You could blame on each other, or you could decide to work together, and you can have a totally different outcome. After my work at the Lucent as a business leader, I decided, what I really wanted to do was, go back to university environment and share what I learned with a student. So I became a professor at the University of Maryland. I was appointed at the mechanical engineering department and electrical and computer engineering department. And I thought, by sharing my knowledge and what I did with my life story, maybe I could inspire some of the younger mind. When I think about philanthropy is a very personal matter. You can donate money, you can donate your time, and you can donate, your passion and others. And, I thought, well, obviously I donate money to universities because I benefit from education, but donating my time and my experience was more in line with how I like to contribute. So I did that for a few years. Then something crazy happened. 9/11. Before 9/11, I got a call from the very senior government official asking me to join the presidential task force, the review of U.S. intelligence. It's called NSPD, National Presidential Directive 5, I guess. It was led by Brent Scowcroft, and then there were 8 members total, and I was the youngest one, and they were listed there, and that group could benefit from my technical background. So we were working along, and then 9/11 happened. I was asked to chair the subcommittee on how different U.S. intelligence agency can share the information. So became really busy. 9/11 really taught us very important things. How do you prioritize what's important in life, and how vulnerable we could be. Well, a fast forward a few more years, the new CEO of Lucent Technology was seeking my advice on different matters. So I was seeing her on a sort of a periodic basis, and then she asked me to come and help her with learning the Bell Labs. And it's a great honor. Somebody who worked in telecommunication industry, Bell Lab is a storied lab. I think Steve Chu was there when he received, based on the research there, he received the Nobel Prize, and there are many others. So it was a great honor. I planned to be there for only 2 years, but it turned out I was there for 8 years. But one thing that I want to share about Bell Labs is, it's an incredible place. So many incredible researchers that won, so many incredible awards. And you have to ask why. And the Philips laboratory done a study on why Bell Lab was more successful over the years versus Philips lab. And their conclusion was simple. Bell Labs sourced best and brightest talent from all around the world, whereas a Philips lab hired best and brightest from the country in Germany. And when you get the best and brightest from the world, you have an unfair advantage over somebody who sourced locally. And it turns out the Bell Labs throughout the history, more than 50% of researchers were foreign born. So it's obvious to pretty much everybody in this seminar that diversity is a true strength. When the best and brightest people from all around the world comes to this country and work and study, make a living, pursue their career, we all benefit.
John, 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I just want to say a couple more words and maybe complete. Now, in my life, I try to contribute what I could to the community and so on, but that's really small compared to those who put down their lives for others. These three former Navy guys, Tom Norris, Chip Stockdale, and Michael Dalton, received the Medal of Honor for their extreme bravery and their unselfish act. I salute them. This is my last chapter. I want to say this. America is the nation of immigrants. We and our ancestors came here to pursue a better life. In America, opportunities exist if you work hard and pursue them regardless of your background and country of origin. We all knew it as the American dream. America is strong and prosperous, in part because many people have pursued the American dream and succeeded. So let's keep it alive. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That is just such an amazing, inspiring story. Thanks for telling us. Okay, so next I'm going to read a statement from the Asian American Scholar Forum that was prepared for this webinar. They prepared it for us. The AASF is a nonprofit, non-political organization representing a community of Asian American scholars that are united to promote academic belonging, openness, freedom, and equality for all. So here's their statement. We are extremely alarmed by the actions taken by the Department of Justice's China Initiative. These federal prosecutions of Chinese American scientists have created an atmosphere of fear and undermined America's research environment. We would like to make a few points. We acknowledge that there are extremely difficult problems with US-China relations, and there are researchers of all backgrounds who have made errors and omissions in their grant disclosures. We strongly object to the notion that malicious intent to engage in espionage and loyalty to a foreign government are the only explanation of these errors and omissions. And we believe that it is reasonable to start with a presumption that mistakes, ignorance, and other lesser problems are far more likely causes. Intent matters. The China Initiative invokes criminalization as the first resort. Publicized cases are only the tip of the iceberg. A recent Newsweek article reports that over 500 scientists are currently under investigation. Many of them have been dismissed, as Steve mentioned, from tenured positions without due process for failure to disclose regular academic activities involving China when the activities were encouraged and when the rules were not clear. The China Initiative has had a chilling effect on America's research environment. Here are some examples. Example 1, a prominent Chinese American scientist has recently decided to leave a tenured university position in the US for one in China. They said, I certainly felt that it was not safe in the US anymore. There were two things that really bothered me. The first is that not long ago, collaboration with China was encouraged. The second issue was that the rule of law was not followed. We have heard many horror stories like the ones with Gang Chen and Xiaoxing Xi. It seems that some investigators do not care about the rule of law. Whenever I saw a police car coming to my street, I worried that they were coming to arrest me. Example 2, a prominent Chinese American professor in the US is on sabbatical at a major university in China to visit relatives there. A few months into their sabbatical, the FBI contacted 3 of their PhD students, asking them if their advisor had any misconduct, such as illegally passing intellectual property to China. The professor is now very worried about coming back after sabbatical. Example 3. Several years ago, a prominent scientist was recruited from China to a US university. Now the scientist is considering a top offer outside both the US and outside China. The scientist said, "The feeling of being unwelcome in this country has made me doubt from time to time whether I made the right decision to come to the US years ago. I would not even have read recruiting emails in the past. Now I not only read such emails, I went for 2 interviews." Example 4, a recent postdoc of Chinese descent decided to accept a job offer in Canada over one from the US that was better from a career standpoint because they are worried about being targeted in the future under the China Initiative. We conclude by saying that as academics and as citizens of this country, we are troubled and heartbroken by these developments. Most Asian American scholars have voted with our feet to stay in the United States because we believe in democracy, freedom of speech, the rule of law, an open research environment, and explorations without fear. We believe in the idea of America, and we believe that this is the best country in the world to do science. We implore all of you to support us, to pressure your research institutions to support us, and to pressure the Biden administration to re-examine their China Initiative and to come up with an approach that is better suited for the problems it's trying to address. Thank you. So I'd like to thank the Asian American Scholar Forum for that statement. So now I'd like to introduce Mengken Liu, an associate professor in experimental condensed matter physics at Stony Brook. Unfortunately, Mengken is unable to attend this meeting, so I'm going to read his statement. Okay. The Chinese American comedian Joe Wong once said, "China is like my mother and the United States is like my wife. Now they don't get along. To make it even worse, they both have nuclear weapons." Chinese scholars are now in the same awkward position as his hopeless husband, and things are even far worse than this. The mother blames him for leaving home, while the wife accuses him of mommy issues. This is beyond awkwardness. This is bizarre, and it makes me angry and confused. When elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Scientists and researchers of Chinese origin are greatly affected by the unfriendly atmosphere created by the confrontation between the Chinese and American governments. I feel that racial prejudice and unjust political investigations have affected the normal life and work of Chinese scholars. In the past few years, I've often gotten questions from Chinese students and young researchers about whether they should still choose to come to the United States for their study or research. They are puzzled and anxious. They are questioning the foundations of our scientific community and the belief in the notion of science without boundaries. This year, for example, I lost 2 brilliant incoming graduate students and 1 postdoc who are intimidated and discouraged by the unfriendly atmosphere that has spread in the US and have decided to give up the opportunity to come here. My parents are greatly concerned with my safety and future career in the USA, one of them said. Our international students and young researchers are the most vulnerable and innocent among us. Unfortunately, most of them are struggling with their careers and have little protection against unfair treatment. This makes the already difficult academic environment nearly unbearable. I know that things change. Human societies have walked all the way through the ups and downs of wars, epidemics, ignorance, peace, self-destruction, love, and progress. There's darkness and light. The renewed US commitment to international education is an important change in the federal immigration policy for our international students. And we hope more policy changes and productive conversations will follow. These are indeed difficult times, and we from all corners of the world are facing a lot of common problems. As scientists, we must hold the line and stay reasonable, rational, and united. So I'd like to thank Mengken Liu for this statement. And now I'd like to introduce Chrissy Xiu Du. Chrissy, would you like to unmute and turn on your camera? Chrissy is a postdoc in theoretical soft matter physics at Harvard, and she will now tell you what it's like to be an international student in the US. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for the introduction and for inviting me to speak here. And thank you, APS, for organizing this amazing webinar series. I have felt alone and fearful in the past few years at different times, but knowing that there's a group of people working together to make the current situation better has given me an immense amount of courage and hope. And this is why I'm able to speak here today to share with you about my experience. So I just graduated from an F1 student visa in May this year. So I want to really share some of my experience as an international student from China with you, especially the complication and the uncertainty during the visa application process. I started my education in the US as an undergrad student. And back then, the visa application was relatively easy and straightforward. Even though I have to renew my visa every year, I go back to China in the summer, mail in a list of required documents, and I will get my visa within 2 weeks at the most. But after undergraduate, I started my PhD in physics, and I went back to China to apply for a new student visa. But the process just got much less straightforward. And not only do I need to bring all the documents, like all the documents I needed for my undergrad, I also need to bring a study plan detailing what courses I'm going to take during grad school and what my research and my advisor would be if I already have one. And in addition, I might also be asked for my advisor's CV, and sometimes the CV is 80 pages long. I really feel like I was killing some trees when I was printing out those CVs and relevant peer review papers. And after having prepared all these documents, if I am lucky at the visa interview, I will get a paper slip that indicates that I'm subject to administrative processing, or in Chinese International Student Circle being checked. So that means that someone else will need to review my documents to make sure that what I'm studying is not sensitive. And I will get my visa in 3 weeks at the earliest. Normally it takes a month or up to 2 months. And there is a website where you can check what's the general status of people's cases, and you find a lot of horror stories there. And some people listed there, they have been under administrative processing for years. So I got checked the first time I applied for a student visa to go do my PhD, and had to rebook my flight back to the US twice. And in addition, that visa was only valid for 1 year, which means that if I want to leave the US after that year and re-enter, I have to reapply outside the United States. And there is a high chance I will get checked again. And so this situation raises dilemmas for many Chinese students. Should we risk being stuck outside of the US for months to visit family? Or should we just don't go home for our entire PhD? I was very lucky to have an understanding advisor during my PhD, so I went through the visa application process 3 more times. And even though I have done this many times already, I still get extremely nervous every time I go to the consulate. I rehearse the whole 3 minutes interview with visa officers in my head countless times. And of course, someone would always not go as planned in that consulate room. So one time I printed out my advisor's file from the engineering school inside of the physics department because I saw the engineering school website had a better bio for her. And then the visa officer saw the paper and just asked me very directly, why are you working with someone from material science instead of physics? You're doing a PhD in physics. I was so nervous and my sentence was half broken, and I tried really hard to explain how my advisor also have an appointment in physics. And that was the time where not only I got checked, I also got asked for a request for more evidence, which made the visa application process even longer. And I was stuck in China for like 2 months that time. And the last time I applied for a student visa, I was extremely prepared and organized and answered every question from the visa officer flawlessly. The visa officer kind of just stared at me for a second and was like, wow, you're really prepared, and then gave me the slip indicating administrative processing. And after that, I came back to the US to finish my PhD and start my postdoc, and haven't applied for a visa for 4 years, because now I don't know how long my visa application would take. So this is just like one tiny glimpse of all the other things I overcame in the past 13 years studying and working in the States. But I chose to tell this story today because I believe that this story can resonate with many other Chinese international students out there. I'm also telling this story because I have explained this visa process to many people in the past. And to my surprise, not many people know how complicated this process can be. And I wouldn't say this process is unique to the Chinese international students, but I do know that many other many international students from other parts of the world do not need to prepare as many documents, and they can get a 5-year student visa instead of 1-year one. And I have friends who wanted to come to the US to do postdocs or grad schools, but decided to not to because they're too afraid of the uncertainty in the visa process. I hope by speaking here, people will know more about the potential day-to-day struggle of an international student doing PhD in the US. I also want to encourage Chinese international students listening today to not be afraid to voice their concerns and struggles. It was very hard for me to do so at the beginning, but I realized that if I don't tell my story, no one else can tell it for me. And thank you very much for your time listening.
Thanks so much, Chrissy, for sharing that. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful to you and also Munkun for speaking up today. It's really a service to all of us. Thank you. So finally, let me introduce Mark Elsesser. He's the APS Director of Government Affairs, and he'll give us an update on how visa and other policies are changing under the Biden administration. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Andrea. So let me start my comments with what's probably, I think, an obvious statement to everybody here. And that's that the previous administration's visa and immigration policies were objectively bad for the US scientific enterprise. I say this not only because their policies aim to restrict the world's best and brightest from coming to the US to study and have a successful career, but also because of the personal pain that their policies and the rhetoric have caused for so many in our community, some of whom we've just heard from in the last few minutes. And so to those who have suffered from those policies or are continuing to struggle with them, I want you to know that APS is working hard on your behalf to change them and to get us to a better place. So what do I mean when I say APS is working on these issues? Well, that means to me that thousands of APS members are writing to their members of Congress about these issues. It means that our elected leaders, folks like APS President Jim Gates and our past President Phil Buxbaum, are meeting with high-ranking officials in the White House and at the Department of Justice. And it means that APS Government Affairs is leading efforts with our partner scientific societies to push for change in these areas. Now, it's important to remember that both a new Congress and a new administration started back in January of this year. And with new policymakers come new opportunities to push for change. And we're already seeing positive changes, and we're hopeful that there are more to come. So let me give you just two important examples of how we're seeing things change just in the last few months. First, you might remember that last fall, the Trump administration proposed a rule to eliminate the current duration of status guidelines for students. So instead of allowing students to stay until the completion of the degree, the Trump administration wanted to impose restrictive 2 or 4-year time limits on them. Now, these term limits would essentially be unworkable, right, for anybody getting a physics PhD or any PhD student, really. Due to the hard work of many, that proposed rule was delayed and couldn't be implemented by the Trump administration. So that rule got passed on to the Biden administration, and they had to decide what to do with it. And I think what they decided to do is really instructive to us all. So the Biden administration knew that rule change was a terrible idea, like all of us did. And over the summer, they completely withdrew the proposed rule and decided to keep the current duration of status guidelines unchanged. That's an important signal for us to send to international students. Now, an even more recent example happened earlier this week. The House Judiciary Committee passed its portion of a larger reconciliation package currently being developed by congressional Democrats. That legislation includes changes to our high-skilled immigration policies that would allow a clear path to a green card for international STEM students. It would allow students to go from an F1 visa to OPT to employment-based green cards. That means no H-1B, that means no long waiting times. This would be a dramatic and necessary improvement from our current policies. Now, these two examples certainly don't solve all of our problems. There is a lot more to do, but I think these two examples show that change is possible and it is occurring. They show that we have an administration and a Congress that understand the value that international students and scholars bring to this country. And they show that they're willing to work with us to find a better path forward for a better future for us all. So I'd like to thank Andrea and others for organizing this and giving me the opportunity to give APS Government Affairs perspective. And I look forward to the Q&A with everybody who's joined today. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate that. So we're about now to take a break. So let's take I'm sorry, I think I'm gonna make it instead of a 10-minute break, let's make it a 5-minute break to 3:15. And then we'll start the Q&A session. So all the speakers will be part of the Q&A session. And so please put your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat. And we'll see you back then at 3:15 or 15 after the hour for whatever time zone you're in. Thank you very much. Oh, by the way, not only would we like questions, but if you have suggestions for actions that can be taken to improve the culture for international students and scientists, those would be great, both for people in the community, for APS and other scientific societies and so forth. So those suggestions would be great also. Thank you. See you at 1/4 after. Yeah. So I'm going to start posing some of the questions, and if any of you, I'm going to pose it, I'm going to try to direct them to certain people, but feel free, even if it's not directed to you, to jump in and answer it. Okay. So
Andrea, before you start,
yeah. Oh, yes.
someone has turned off my camera and I can't turn it on.
Oh my goodness. Midhead, can you help him? And this reminds me, Jim Gates would like to say a few words before we get started. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Andrea. And I also want to thank all of our presenters, Steve, Jung, Chrissy, and you for reading the letters. When we started Delta Phi, we had a vision that this was, and also Mark, let me not leave out Mark, we had a vision that this is the kind of opportunity for the APS to come together in a new way to solve its own problems. Jung gave a very interesting presentation, in a part of his presentation, when he talked about getting people to talk, and in the context of facing challenges together. And that's the same vision that we're trying to implement for the APS. And we hope it becomes a permanent part of the culture. And only successive leaders of the organization and members will establish that. But, I'm just so grateful to all of you. For those of you who are out there who haven't gotten involved, please, please, please reach out to us. The APS is a membership organization. That means we respond to the needs and express desires of the membership. So please do not stand back and say, someone ought to. This is something I hear too often. Members say, someone should. Well, how come your name isn't someone? That's the question I have. Someone should means you should. And APS is a way for you to do that. So I wanted to thank everybody on behalf of the making presentations. As the person who created this kind of forum, I'm ecstatic, and we look forward to many more contributions. So I'm going to get out your way now and let you tend your business. A special thanks to the organizing committee led by my fantastic colleague, Professor Andrea Liu. So bye-bye.
And thank you, Jim, for your leadership, your vision on this. This really means a lot to a lot of people. Thank you. Okay, so the first question was posed to Steve and Jung. And the question was, what would be your advice for us to effectively convey your powerful message to the general public and thus to our lawmakers?
John, why don't you start?
I think when I think about circle of influence, it has to start from you, and then your smaller circle of friends. And then as you become more influential, you can perhaps reach out to, somebody higher in politics and pushing up a significant influence. But everybody has their own capability and start with you. And I think most important is you take an action based on what you can. And if you try to do something that is beyond what it is you are capable, then it's not going to be effective. So depend, I don't know what the question, there is, but if you're a student, talk to your friends, talk to your teachers, talk to your families, your friends. And then, at some point, somebody in that circle may have, if you will convince them of your cause, then they will talk to their friends. I think that's how you get the words out.
I think that's great advice. Let me add that there may be some of you who might have a friend connected somewhere in the government. And I think that the government, industry, academia, everything fundamentally works on personal trust. And so sending anonymous letters and things of that nature won't have the impact that you would want. And so it's very much in keeping with what Jiang just said. You establish this personal trust with your friends, your family, and if you happen to know people or connected to people by way of introduction, perhaps you can tell them of your experiences and what is happening. I think members of Congress, members of administrations, public servants, for the most part, do care about these things. And so, again, it's going to be based on personal trust.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, one of the things that I want to just mention, that toolkit that I mentioned earlier, which is that a bunch of people just got together following the suggestion from the last webinar in this series to put together a toolkit for faculty or researchers to put some pressure on their research institutions to support people who are, for example, under investigation for international ties, or who have international collaborations. We have a lot of disclosure to do now associated with that, with no help to actually do it. And so, a bunch of people stepped up to put together this toolkit. And I think that's the kind of thing that, we can do. We can, when we see something that can be done, to actually step up and do that. And to find like-minded people. And now we've got this toolkit. We hope that people will use it at different universities.
Andrea, can I just interject? You reminded me of something else. And you're quite right. But as I tried to indicate in my talk, certain things that the Justice Department, the FBI is doing is actually not consistent with US law, or certainly things that have been enunciated by several presidencies. I did not talk about this, but it's also some of the things that are coming from funding agencies are not consistent with university standards of academic freedom and so on and so forth. And so in those instances, if you're at a university, and I'm doing this at Stanford, you have to remind administrators, instead of just remaining silent, that if it's actually inconsistent with the standards of academic integrity and independence within the university, that perhaps the university should speak out.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, the next question is actually, I think, for Mark. And that is, how has the path to a green card changed for STEM students within the last 20 years?
So I can't comment on how the path has changed in the last 20 years, but I think there was a question, if I read it correctly, is this has been tried for the last 20 years to change these paths, and what we hope is different now. And what's different now than has been in the past is reconciliation. So Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House, and there is a path for them to pass legislation that doesn't require support from the other party. So there's a path that doesn't require 60 votes in the Senate, so a simple majority there and a simple majority in the House. It's called reconciliation. And as part of that package, the House Democrats are putting forward legislation that would allow a clear path to green cards for international students. Like I said, they can go from F1 to OPT to EB visa, EB green card as a clear path. And really, the only reason OPT is even necessary is due to the processing time to fill out the paperwork, et cetera. I'll also note that if folks are under this legislation, if folks are on H-1Bs and in line for a green card, right, as we know is the case for so many from India and China, there is a path for them as well to move up in the queue and not have to wait those long years. I will say, right, that this is current legislation. It's not law. It's going to be subject, the House bill will be subject to the parliamentarian deciding whether or not it's germane to reconciliation. There's certainly opinions out there that says it should be, and then ultimately, right, it'll have to be passed by both chambers and signed by the president. But this is a unique opportunity that we haven't seen before, and that's what makes it so different than what we've seen for the last 20 years, and what makes me personally more hopeful.
Thanks, Mark. There's another comment about visas that I think I'll bring up now. So, so I'm going to just read it. Staying in the US on OPT is actually quite inconvenient for many logistical and bureaucratic reasons. For example, DMV gives your driver's license only valid until the date on your OPT, which is typically less than a year away. You cannot apply for visas to attend conferences in the last 6 months of the period, and the next 3 months when your OPT is about to expire. Due to these roadblocks, I personally had to miss out on multiple things that would have furthered my career. In the short term, I imagine getting universities to do something is easier than passing a bill in Congress. APS could persuade universities to change their policies regarding immigration. So most universities have a policy that postdocs must first finish the OPT period before the university applies for an H-1B. If instead the university applied for an H-1B in the postdoc's first year, that would make life much easier rather than having to stay on OPT for 3 years. So, Mark, what do you think of that?
Well, we're a federal policy, government affairs works on federal policy, and so we are focused actually on the need on what I hope is a path, right, where folks would only be on OPT for a very short amount of time, not 3 years, right? That is, if you graduate, you move to OPT simply while your paperwork is being filed until you move to your employment-based visa. APS typically doesn't get involved in university policies, right, and actions on individual campuses.
Yes, what I would like to say here is that, the sort of instructions or suggestions that we put in the toolkit for, about research security issues could be adapted pretty easily for this purpose, to try to urge universities to change their policies in terms of, when do they apply for H-1Bs for postdocs. So, that could be something we're trying, and I think it would be worth, maybe some volunteers, standing up to try to put together a revised toolkit for that purpose. Okay. Any other comments from anyone? Okay, there's yet another suggestion for an action, which is that the State Department employees who conduct the visa application interviews that Cassie described hold out of proportion power over the result of the application. I suppose they have been trained by the State Department on how to conduct this process. They have also been inculcated with attitudes about foreign science students. The APS needs to find a way to get information about the US's dependence on such students for its future prosperity to this set of State Department employees. They are sitting in US embassies all over the world, but must have been trained here in DC. The professional science societies need to find a way to educate these visa application agents about the need to allow such students to continue their studies in the US.
I think this is for me, and I'll just say I don't disagree. And we have had already conversations, right, about how to bring in S&T expertise into that process in the counselor's office. So these are things that we have thought about and are in conversations with folks in government about.
Okay, let's see here. There's a question about sanctions. So about countries that are subject to sanctions from the US. So this is something that affects scientists in those who are in those countries, not in the US. Like, for example, restrictions on publications in some journals, not being able to participate in conferences, and things like MATLAB and so forth are not available to scientists in those countries. I don't know if anybody has, if Mark, do you have anything to say about that?
Unfortunately, that's outside of my area of expertise.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much, I mean, yeah, if the APS can, I don't know. I think what's underlying this is can the APS do anything to put pressure on the government to ease, these aspects of sanctions so the scientists can still do, work in those countries. Okay, let's see. Let's see. There's another question from a student. I'm currently a graduate student in physics, an international student from Poland. I wanted to apply for fellowships and grants, but I find it extremely hard to find funding opportunities for non-US citizens. I don't understand why this should be the case if the goal is to support promising scientists that study in the US. So is APS planning any initiative to have grants, fellowship, or funding available for international students and scientists to encourage them to pursue their research in the US? I guess, Mark, that question is again for you.
I am popular so far.
Yes.
So we don't have anything currently planned. I think it's an interesting idea. I actually don't know I'd have to think more about barriers, et cetera, and who the people are to engage in it. But I certainly think it's an interesting idea and one that we can start at least having an internal discussion about. I appreciate the idea.
Can I interject a little bit? I think I sympathize. There are very, very few fellowships open to foreign students. And I think this would be a fundraising opportunity to begin to approach people who have come to the United States, have been very successful, and to be thinking of donating to actually support more graduate students and postdocs with these fellowships.
That's a great idea. Yes.
So Steve, thank you for that suggestion. APS International Affairs is conducting a really thorough review of everything it's doing. And so this is can be put on the plate with the rest of that review process. So thank you.
And actually just broaden it and approach the other professional societies, the American Chemical Society, Material Science, the AAAS, all these societies.
Yep. Um, Andrea Zhouling has also put a question in the chat because she can't reach the question and answer because she's a panelist.
Ah. Okay,
That's me.
yes. Okay, do you want to just speak up? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
if I'm allowed, so let me just talk. Yeah, this is Xiaoliang Qi from Stanford. Yeah, sorry, I think as a panelist, I can only answer the question. So I have a question to Chrissy and also the rest of you, which is basically like how can we encourage people to speak up more, especially the young researchers like students and postdocs. So we know that there are a lot of effects on not only like visa is so complicated, but like people are often like interrogated at the airport, and some people are investigated and so on. There is a lot of these problems, and we all know like it will be very valuable information and that plays an important role in influencing the policy makers and the public opinion. But we all know like it's very hard for people to speak out because there's all kinds of concerns. So I guess my question is like, what kind of thing we can do to encourage people to speak out, even if it's anonymous, like maybe some platform, maybe some way that people can talk anonymously and feel safe, or maybe there is even already some forum like students discuss each other about this that we don't know. So that's generally my question. Thanks.
Yeah, so I know that the APS put together this report that contained stories from a lot of international students, right? Maybe Mark, you can say a few words about that. That was recently. I remember that report. And I guess the question is, maybe there could be a way to just constantly gather these stories.
Yeah, I was also wondering what Chrissy knows about, like what is the format that students will feel convenient to talk about this.
Just go ahead.
I guess I can briefly say a few words. I think one of the most important things to encourage early career scientists to speak up is like you have to kind of like gain their trust. Like once like they trust you, they will more likely to share their stories with you, and then you can, like, as someone who feels safer, they can help to be the one who like gets stories from many different people and then try to talk to others who can actually do policy changes. So for example, the reason I'm able to speak here is because like I shared with Andrea my personal story and she invited me to come to speak.
Yeah. Okay.
So I could,
yes,
just say,
yes.
just say, Andrea, you mentioned, so APS did have a report earlier this year titled Building America's STEM Workforce. And there was a large portion of that report, about half of it was dedicated to surveys we did of graduate students, early career scientists, both domestic and international, and a lot of powerful data and stories from them. And we found that report actually has a lot of influence, had a lot of influence, continues to have influence with policymakers on Capitol Hill and the executive branch. And so we've actually sent out another survey, which I hope you have received. Same thing, asking a series of questions about visa and immigration policy and also about research security policies and their implications. I encourage everybody, if they haven't yet participated in that survey, to do so. We take those surveys, we take that data, we pull out the most compelling portions and then package it in ways that can ultimately help us drive our policy and advocacy actions forward. So I encourage you, that's one place to have your voice shared. And also if there are particular stories you want to share that you think would be helpful, always feel free to reach out to the Government Affairs Office directly and we can have a conversation.
Okay, so the next is from Cheng Chin, who is speaking on behalf of the International Organization of Chinese Physicists and Astronomers, OCPA. So the challenges to obtain a US visa happen to more than a few cases we discussed, but a sizable fraction of international scholars at all levels, and will impact our ability to recruit new young talents. I suggest that we should work with the APS to collect data from all universities to show its impact on our ability to attract local talents in the past years. The fact is that we see a steep decrease of international applicants to the PhD programs in the US.
I can't do anything except to say that we agree and we're doing exactly that. So in addition to the survey we have on visa and immigration policies and research security, we have a survey that's now in its 4th year, I believe, going out to physics department chairs across the US, looking at changes in applications and enrollments of international and domestic graduate students. And we also use that data in our advocacy efforts. So I 100% agree with this.
Andre, can I make a comment on the previous? I got interrupted, but the previous question, Xiaoling, about about young researchers speaking out. I think there's something that faculty members can do. I actually talk about this in my group meetings, at least every other group meeting, if not every group meeting. And just having a faculty member be willing to talk about it in a group meeting is a start. If the faculty member is not willing to talk about it, how can they expect the students to talk about it?
I couldn't agree more. I also bring it up almost every group meeting. And I really encourage everybody to do that in their group meetings. I totally agree. This is an issue. And so many of us have, international students and scholars in our groups. And just to hear that these problems acknowledged also means a lot. Okay, so here's a question. Was there any real inciting incident for the China initiative in 2018? Is it based on real growth in research security breaches or just personal animosity towards China of the US president in 2018? The China initiative has done real harm, but has it ever had real grounds? Steve?
Yeah, I think when I looked at all the cases, if you go on the FBI website that brags about the China initiative, I actually went there, read all the cases. And there's certainly some cases where it looks like there was industrial spying, but virtually all those cases, the vast majority of them were true industrial spying, which is to be differentiated from academics who have not checked the right boxes. And so there is some significant industrial spying going on, and that's a reality. And so the real issue is how to separate that from this overreaching undercurrent of deep suspicion of people who are very innocent and just swept up in the industrial espionage. And then again, there's a deep confusion between failing to check the boxes, which of course now the universities are trying to help their faculty members do that, and truly trying to ferret out material secrets of work, proprietary work being done or academic work before it's published. And there's, in my opinion, very little evidence of people in academia doing that. Group leaders who have international students would kind of know if all of a sudden, people are beginning to do similar work to them before they publish. So I think we would be very sensitive to something like that. So again, but there are instances of true industrial spying going on, and also strong evidence that the Chinese government is helping.
I'll just echo Steve's comments and say, the China initiative is broader, right? Much more broad than just this focus on academics, and that's really why APS. We sent a letter earlier at the beginning of September from President Jim Gates to OSTP Director and Attorney General Garland, on the need to reformulate the China initiative to do exactly kind of what Steve mentioned, which is focus on where the threats are, right? We know there are threats for industrial espionage. We know there's trade secret theft. We're concerned about theft of classified research, but there hasn't been, right, compelling evidence to show that academic researchers who have issues of, administrative non-disclosure pose national security threats. So, let's refocus the initiative. We want the initiative renamed, right? These threats don't just come from China, they come from any country. And attaching a name of a particular country to an initiative really raises concerns about ethnic profiling. So we have a series of recommendations put forward in the letter from President Gates. I encourage folks to go to APS's website and check the letter out.
Yeah, I also should mention that the Aming Hu judgment, the district court opinion, 52 pages, is going to actually change a lot of things because Professor Hu was charged of wire fraud and failing to disclose. And what wire fraud means is you've told it legally is you have to have two things. You have to deceive with the intent of defrauding, and damages have to occur, either value or reputation or whatever. And the judge found that there were no damages in the case of NASA being harmed. They contracted for research. They were happy with the research. And so there is a difference. So yes, the professor did not check the box 3 years earlier and things like that. But it was not for the intent to defraud, and which includes harm. The other, and so what wire transfer, by the way, means is the information just goes across state lines through the internet, the phone, you name it. And the other issue has to do with this concealment stuff. So if you look at the opinion, many of the people being charged and many of the people being dismissed by universities seem to have been falling in that camp. So there's now additional legal precedent. The judge spent 52 pages talking about the previous legal precedent, saying Aming Hu is not guilty by any reasonable juror, period. And so this will help emphasize that a lot of these charges and people who've been pleading guilty should not have been pleading guilty. And so we'll see what happens in the coming months and years.
Yes. John, did you have
I
something?
just wanted to add a little bit from a perspective of an American who spent 7 years as an immigrant to Canada, where in fact, I was harassed at the border by border guards and all sorts of things. So it seems to be a fairly common feature of border guards. But in Canada, the issue, they're also quite concerned about Chinese espionage, but it seems to me, to my mind, at least as director of a national laboratory, what tended to happen there was that scientists, Canadian scientists, essentially gave colleagues in Canada what Canada gave colleagues in China what Canada considered to be Canadian developed intellectual property without valuing it very carefully. And so what they've done is institute all sorts of programs to try to teach people about the value of intellectual property and so on and so forth. But it got really nasty in Canada when China arrested the two Michaels in response to the Canadian arrest of the CFO of Huawei. And so these things tend to get intertwined in larger political contexts. And so when one's looking for an event, I would say, at least in Canada, that was a big triggering event. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next thing was immigration issues are unique to internationals and take important time away from research, including applying for OPT as a graduate student, STEM OPT, J1 and H1 visas for postdocs, etc. Having a dedicated administrator to help internationals with this would be fantastic. The institutes I've been at don't have such a person, and for each I had to run around for weeks trying to talk to the international office, HR, departmental administrators who are rather clueless. This was a stressful and unnecessary experience and perhaps could be mitigated or avoided if one has a dedicated trained professional to help with this. So yeah, I totally agree. I think a lot, Penn does have such an office, but a lot of places do not. And I think that, maybe again, take a look at this toolkit that we put together on how to put some pressure on university administrators and see if something can be done. I think the tendency of a lot of students, I mean, it's, there are students are dealing with a lot of things and just have a lot of pressures on them coming from so many different directions. And so then to get involved in something like this can seem really difficult, right? But if you can get faculty to help you and to push this forward, it can be a lot more effective. And so I really encourage you to speak out and try to recruit faculty and talk about, how difficult things are. Chrissy, I don't know if you have something to add to this.
No, I think you have said it all. Yeah. And I guess, okay, maybe there's like a tiny thing I'll add is if there's like a way for university to help reimburse students visa application fees or like OPT, STEM OPT application fees, I think that at least like shows a gesture that the university cares. And those are not cheap. I think like STEM OPT right now, the application fees may be like $400 something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Okay, here's another thing. Most American professors are unaware of immigration hoops. They don't know what letter number combinations like F1, OPT, et cetera mean. It would be good to educate them on these issues and be more supportive to their students, both in terms of knowing how to fill out the correct paperwork on time, as well as understanding the career and mental health impacts of US immigration problems. I couldn't agree more, and that's one of the purposes of this webinar, is to try to educate people on this. Does anybody else have something to add on this comment? Okay.
Does the American Physical Society have a place that faculty members can go to check to say, how do you help your students navigate green card applications, OPTs, everything? I guess it goes to you, Mark.
Well, I will let John answer.
My answer is I actually don't know, but it's a takeaway from this event for me to go find out. And if we don't have one, I don't see why we shouldn't. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to answer the same. And I think John and I both know the person we want to talk would ask immediately at APS about it.
Okay, so some domestic students, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds, feel as though international students have an unfair advantage in STEM university admissions, since the US has such a poor STEM K-12 education. As we try to diversify university programs, how can we balance opportunities given to international and domestic applicants?
So this is a great question, and I'll start by saying, when APS thinks about the STEM talent pipeline, right, there are two important pieces, right? There is the international piece and our need to want to attract and retain the best and brightest from around the world, but there's also the domestic piece, and we know we have to do more, right, to bolster that domestic pipeline. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to show folks some of the things we are doing. There's a Building America's STEM Workforce report that came out earlier this year. That the first half of the report is all about how you build a diverse domestic workforce. We care a lot about making sure all students have access to physics course taught by a high quality physics teacher, right? So there's programs that we're working on associated with that. We want to make sure at the university level that we provide research opportunities to any student who wants one at their home institution, right? So this means broadening research opportunities beyond what you might traditionally think of as the R1s to, R2s, R3s, regional publics, MSIs, HBCUs. So those are just a few of the programs that we're pushing for in legislation. And we actually this year have language in current bills to address those issues. So it's a great question.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I don't think it helps to view this sort of as a zero-sum game, that slots are either going to international students or to domestic students, and that helping international students will hurt diversity or anything like that. I think that when we work together to try to improve the culture of physics, the culture for students, to make it a less stressful experience for everybody, that helps everybody. And so, and I think this is part of, the message of these webinars, is that we're all in this together. And if we actually work together to make the culture of physics more hospitable for everybody, that benefits the whole field. We have to do our hardest to improve the diversity in physics. And we have to be also working our hardest to help international students and really any group that is suffering under the current situation.
Yeah, I just want to say I agree 100%, Andrew, and I didn't mean to give the impression that we want to that is an either or situation, because it's not. We really need to do a lot of work for both. Great.
Yeah.
Now, Andrea, as I was listening to this conversation, I'd like to maybe offer my thoughts. Now, I think it is probably wise to over-rotate in terms of action to educate as many people as possible, mobilize as many people as possible to overcome some of these challenges. Some can be done at the institution, among faculty members and through people coming together. But you can also do it as an individual. If you are a graduate student who went through this difficult process, perhaps you can be a mentor for somebody else who is facing this challenge. Maybe APS can offer a way for them to connect. Somebody who is willing to be a mentor, somebody who is going through this process to help them guide through both in the practical knowledge as well as a mental support. Because I think human network is sometimes the most powerful network.
Yes, and I would encourage students to join the Forum for Graduate Student Affairs, and also for early career scientists and APS. Once you're a member of those fora, you can get through APS Engage. You can connect with other people in them, other members in it. So that's an opportunity. We're getting to the end. I just want to end with a question to Steve, which is, how would you like to encourage students from China to feel comfortable and confident to keep pursuing a career in the US?
I hope they will. I think the United States as a people I still believe in relative to most other societies, a very warm and opening society. And so we're going through anomalous times that I'm hoping will pass, but from the long arc, and there have been times in the past where, excuse me, there have been times in the past where the United States has not been good about things, but I think we will continue to move in the right direction, and I hope you still continue. Many people I've been in, once I remember I was in Germany, and also I've been in Switzerland many times, where people who could have been born in that country could have been second or third generation, and they still feel like they're not Germans. And I think in the history of the United States, yes, my parents came from China, but I always felt that I was accepted as an American.
Yeah. I just want to thank you, Steve. I want to say that I feel that way too. My parents from China, I was born here. The US has gone through a lot of ups and downs. And the good thing is that there are a lot of people who are pushing back, okay? And I think over time, people have learned also better how to push back. And when there are trends in the culture that are really dangerous. And I just have to say again, speak out. This is not the time to bury your head and say, I'm just going to focus on science, which is what we all want to do, frankly, right? We don't really want to be dealing with this stuff, but we have to deal with this stuff. And the more we do, the better the outcome will be. So I hope you will be encouraged by this to take action today. And so I just want to thank all of the speakers again very much, and the APS for hosting this webinar. And I hope you guys will now go out and do something and get involved. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrea.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
people.